All right, guys, this is your review for quiz 8, starting with number 1. We see f of x equals x minus 3 over x squared plus 14x plus 40. And it says, find all values of x that are not in the domain of f. If there is more than one value, separate them with commas. Now, to determine which values are not in the domain, those would be those that make this rational expression equal to a denominator equal to 0. So when my denominator is equal to 0, those values of x cannot be a part of my domain. So to determine those values of x, I take my denominator, x squared plus 14x plus 40, and I set it equal to 0. I have to solve this equation, so we're going to factor. We found two numbers where the product is equal to 40, but the sum, when we add them together, we get 14. And that's x minus 4 and x minus 10 equals 0. After we factor, we set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 4 equals 0. So we added 4 to both sides. We got x equals 4. Or x minus 10 equals 0. We add 10 to both sides, we get x equals 10. So when x is 4 or x is 10, our domain values cannot be 4 or 10. We would list them as 4 or 10, being those x values that are not in the domain. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, we want to divide these two rational expressions. So I listed some reminders here that we want to factor first. And then we remember our rule for dividing these rational expressions, which remember are the same thing as fractions. And when we divide by a fraction, that's equivalent to us multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's actually what we're going to do. We're going to change this operation from division to multiplication, and we're going to take the reciprocal of that second fraction. But we also want to remember to factor. So that's what we did for the first fraction in our numerator, z squared minus 16. That's a difference of perfect squares. So our a term would be z right here. Remember we factor as a plus b and a minus b. Our a term is going to be z. And then our b term, what do I square to get 16? It's 4. So our b term is going to be 4. We factored z squared minus 16 using z plus 4 and z minus 4. Then our denominator, we have z squared minus z minus 12. We want to find two numbers where the product is negative 12, but the sum is negative 1. So we use z minus 4 and z plus 3 in our denominator. On the right side, remember we changed our operation again from division to multiplication. And we also going to list this as the reciprocal, but in our numerator, we could also factor 16. We factored out 16 from 16z and we got z. 16 from 64, we get 4. So this is 16 times z plus 4. Remember, that's going to be moved to the denominator. So 16 times z plus 4 in our denominator. In the denominator of our original fraction, we had negative 8z plus 32. We factored out negative 8. Negative 8 from 8z, we get z, and negative 8 from 32, we get minus 4. Now, remember, this denominator is going to be moved to the numerator. So we listed it here, negative 8 times z minus 4. At this point, we look for any common factors that can be simplified. We can reduce it. We can cancel them out. Z minus 4 and z minus 4, we can cancel those two out. And z plus 4 and z plus 4, we can cancel out. So see, we're left with negative 8 over 16. That can also be reduced. 8 goes into 16 2 times. So we can cancel out the 8 in the numerator. That still leaves a negative sign. So we carried the negative sign down. We carried down the z minus 4. And in our denominator, we have 2 and the z plus 3. This is our answer. negative z plus minus 4 over 2 times z plus 3. Now for the third problem, we see a subtraction. We're subtracting 4 times, well, we got 4 divided by 2y cubed w squared minus 6 divided by 4y cubed w. Now remember, you have to have common denominators in order to add or subtract. Our denominators are not the same, but they're very similar. See, I have 2 in the denominator of my first fraction. I have 4 in the denominator of my second fraction. So I can make these two the same if I multiply the left side, my denominator, by 2, right? 2 times 2 will make this a 4, which will make them equivalent. And because I multiply in the denominator times 2, I must also multiply in the numerator. So 2 times 4 in the numerator, we brought down 8. We have y cubed in the denominator of our first fraction, y cubed in the denominator of our second fraction. So those are already the same. I have w squared in the denominator of my first fraction and just 1 w in the denominator of my second one. So I have to increase this power. I want it to also be w squared. So that means I have to multiply it times w. We got to multiply times w. And because we're multiplying the denominator by w, we also multiply the numerator times w. All right, that's a minus 6 times w, so we carry it down minus 6w. Keep your denominator the same. So remember, our least common denominator is 4y cubed and w squared, and that will be our answer.